My name is Ivy Farrow, and the last thing my mother ever said about my grandmother's letter, she said with her hands. She said it in a coat room at her own awards gala, facing an old mirror, with 300 people shouting over a band 40 feet away. She said it in sign, because sign is quiet, and my mother has spent her whole life believing quiet and safe are the same word. My sister signed, "Is it still in the safe?" My mother signed, "Yes." My sister signed, "Burn it." And I stood in the doorway behind them in a rented navy dress, 34 years old, and read every syllable of it in the reflection, because the woman they were talking about robbing was the only person in that family who ever learned how her own grandmother spoke. 15 years earlier, that same mother put me out of her house with one duffel bag and told me not to make it about money. That night, she was accepting a Legacy in Business award for a shop she took from me. Welcome back to Monkey Stories, where the people who got written out of the family story come back and read it out loud. If you've ever been treated like a footnote in a house you helped hold up, stay with me and hit subscribe before we start. My grandmother was Rosalind Farrow. She lost her hearing at 2 years old, and she ran an alteration shop at 114 Delmer Street for 41 years. If you got married anywhere in Tallow County between 1979 and 2010, her hands were probably on your dress. I learned to sign before I learned to read. I was 4, she watched me 2 afternoons a week, and she talked to me the way she talked. By 7, I was fluent the way children are fluent, and she'd correct me by taking my wrists. Slow hands, she'd sign. Clear hands. She said that to me maybe 4,000 times in 14 years. My mother is Corinne Marchetti, and my mother is the hearing daughter of a deaf mother. She learned to sign as a child because she had no choice, stopped around 16, and built an entire personality out of the stopping. She used to say my grandmother's hands were loud. I was 8, at a diner on Route 9, and my grandmother was telling a story across the table, a good one, about a bride who'd tried to hide a live cat in a garment bag. Her hands were up and moving, and she was laughing that big, unself-conscious laugh. And my mother put her own hand flat on the table and pressed, the way you'd calm a dog. My grandmother stopped mid-story. She looked at that hand for 2 seconds. Then she picked up her coffee, because there were 2 of us. My sister Blythe is 3 years older. At Sunday dinner, she'd sign hello. And how are you? And dinner is good. About 20 signs, the vocabulary of a polite tourist. And my mother would put a hand on her shoulder and tell my grandmother, "She's learning. She's so good with you." Blythe never learned another sign after age 11. Nobody ever said a word about it, because her 20 signs were charming and my hundreds were something else. Here's the sentence my mother used for years, in different rooms, always in the same tone. "Ivy's the one who likes it down there." Down there, the shop. She said it the way you'd say a child likes worms. At 15, I asked to do a summer interpreting program at the State College. 6 weeks, $400. I had 211 of it saved from the shop counter. She said no, not angrily. She said it while going through the mail. And then she said the sentence I've carried like a stone for 19 years. "You're the only one who ever wanted to be down there, Ivy. That's not devotion. That's just where you fit." Blythe went to a dance intensive in Charleston that summer. $1,100. I found the receipt in a kitchen drawer in August and decided, at 15, that I would never ask that woman for anything again. I kept it. 19 years. And she noticed, and she made it mean something it didn't mean. From 14 to 19, I worked in that shop most Saturdays, and around 15, I became its interpreter. A deaf woman had run a customer-facing business for 4 decades on a legal pad, and enormous patience for the half of her customers who shouted at her. Then I showed up, fluent. Teodora Reyes did the machine work there for 22 years. Teo. Remember her. By 17, I had my whole life written in the back of a spiral notebook, the training program, national certification, court certification, and I never told my mother, because the last time I did, she handed me a sentence about where I fit. I told my grandmother instead, in the back room. She took my wrists and slowed me down, then signed one sentence back that I've never repeated to anyone until now. "You are not quiet. They are not listening." I was 17. I thought it was a compliment. The year I turned 18, she started losing her sight. Macular degeneration. Sit with what that is for a deaf woman. It isn't going blind. Her entire language lived in the 18 inches of air in front of her, and the middle of the world was going soft and gray. She wasn't going blind. She was going silent. By that summer, we'd worked out a system without discussing it. She'd hold my wrists, the same grip she'd used since I was 5, and keep my hands inside the small window she could still see. That's how we talked for the last year and a half of her life. Somebody had to handle the doctors and the bank and the paperwork, and my mother handled it beautifully. At 18, it confused me because it looked like love. She was also alone in that apartment with a woman who couldn't hear and increasingly couldn't see, and every piece of paper came through her hands. In April, my grandmother did something she'd been planning on a Wednesday afternoon when my mother was at work, which tells you she knew exactly what she was doing. She had Teo close the shop early and sat at the fitting table and wrote a letter longhand. It took 40 minutes because of her eyes, and she made me read it back twice. It left the building at 114 Delmar Street, the business, and $86,000 in savings to me. It said the money was for me to finish the interpreting program. It said I was to have her shears. Brass-handled, RF filed into the grip, bought secondhand in 1977, and she never let anyone else touch them. And the last line, which I couldn't read out loud then and can barely read out loud now, said, "Ivy is the only one of them who ever came upstairs." Teo signed as a witness, printed her name, dated it. Then my grandmother put it in a manila envelope and told me, with her hands on my wrists, that she was taking it to her attorney to have it done properly and that I wasn't to discuss it with my mother. "She will make it complicated," she signed. "Let me make it simple first. She never made it to the attorney. She had a stroke in September and died in November, 3 weeks before my 19th birthday. The last thing she ever signed to me, 3 days before, small against her chest, was shop. I signed into her palm, 'I know, I'll take care of it.' 2 weeks after the funeral, my mother sat me down at her kitchen table. There was a green folder on it. She had a cup of tea and did not offer me one, which I noticed, because I'd been having tea at that table since I was 7. There are some things you need to understand about how this is going to work." Then she opened the folder and turned it around so I could read it upside down. "You don't hand it over. You show it. A transfer of the property at 114 Delmar Street from Rosalind Farrow to Corinne Marchetti. Dated in June, 5 months before she died." The signature shaky in a way I recognized instantly, because I'd watched that same hand write a letter in April. I said, "She wrote me a letter." And here's what happened to my mother's face. Nothing. A woman hearing about a letter for the first time would have had something. She had the face of a person waiting for you to finish a sentence she'd already read. "There's no letter, Ivy." I said Teo witnessed it. I said it was in a manila envelope in the desk in the back room. She said, "The shop's been cleared out." Cleared out, past tense, in 2 weeks. I said it again, louder, and she let me, and when I was done she took a sip of tea and delivered the 3 sentences that ended my childhood, in the voice you'd use about a broken dishwasher. "Your grandmother was confused at the end. You sat with her. You saw it. Then, she was very fond of you. You were her project. That's not the same as being her heir. And then, when I stood up, you have until Sunday to find somewhere else to stay. And Ivy, don't make this about money. It's ugly on you. Don't make this about money. It's a magic trick. She took $400,000 in real estate and $86,000 in cash off the table, then preemptively assigned the greed to me. If I fought, I was ugly. If I didn't, it must not have mattered." I called Teo that night from the driveway. She confirmed all of it, crying, and then said the thing that took the floor out. "Ivy, I don't have a copy." She said she was taking it to the lawyer. The attorney's office had no such document in the file and no appointment recorded after May. So it existed, and I could not prove it existed. That 18 inches between what is true and what you can hold in your hand is where my mother has always lived. I left on Sunday. There were no theatrics. I packed a duffel bag. Blythe stayed in her room with the door closed, and in 15 years has never offered me an account of what she was doing that afternoon. My mother was at the counter when I came down. "Do you have somewhere to go?" I said yes. I didn't. I had a friend's brother's couch and $140. "Good. Close the door properly, it sticks. The only thing of my grandmother's I took out of that house was her thimble. Brass, worn shiny on one side. It was already in my coat pocket, so it was the one object nobody could tell me I wasn't entitled to. If you've ever been given a deadline to leave a place you thought was home, comment Mouse. I'll tell you in a minute why that's the word. The next 10 years are the part my family invented a story about, because the real one was unavailable to them. I worked a laundromat desk for 8 months, then overnight patient registration at St. Casimir's Hospital for 4 years. Within 2 months, the charge nurse figured out the 20-year-old at registration could sign, and they'd page me at 3 in the morning to interpret an emergency intake, off the books, for a deaf man having a heart attack. The alternative was a frightened man being shouted at by people who thought volume was a strategy. Training program at 22 at night. National certification at 23, first attempt. Court certification at 26. I married Malik at 30. I changed my name to Pharaoh at 24. I wanted a name that didn't come out of that house. And I wanted, in some childish corner I won't apologize for, to walk around the same county wearing the name of the woman they'd erased. Nobody noticed. Not for 15 years. I started Clearhand at 28 with $6,000 and one contract, in a county with a chronic shortage of interpreters. There was a field on the form for business name, and I sat there with my grandmother's voice in my head. Slow hands, clear hands. Last year, Clearhand billed $4.1 million across 3 states, 62 interpreters on contract. We hold the county hospital system, 2 school districts, and the district court. She sold 114 Delmar for $412,000. 95 of it went to Blythe as a down payment on a house. Both facts are public record, which I know because I was 23 and hurting and I looked up everything. With the rest, she opened a bridal boutique in a strip mall on the Route 9 corridor, and she called it Pharaoh and Daughters. I found that out from a billboard. My mother in a cream blazer in front of a rack of dresses, Pharaoh and Daughters, 3 generations of Tallow County brides. My name is on a sign I have never been inside. Then in April, my sister messaged me. 15 years. Not one call, one card, one message. Nothing when I got married. Nothing when I turned 30. Hi, Ivy. Mom is receiving the Legacy in Business Award from the Tallow County Chamber in October. It's co-presented with the Deaf Association because of Grandma. Will you come? 11 minutes later, before I'd answered, a second message. This is the one that told me everything. You'll be at table 4 with us. You don't have to say anything. Just be seen. Just be seen. They didn't want me there. They needed me there. My sister put the difference in writing inside of 11 minutes because it didn't occur to her it would read as anything but practical. The chamber publishes everything, so it took an hour to find the rest. That year, they'd partnered with the Tallow County Association of the Deaf, and my mother's public application leaned on my grandmother entirely. Founder, 41 years, deaf woman in a world that wasn't built for her. The association had asked the obvious question. If this is a legacy business rooted in a deaf founder, who in the current family signs? My mother, who has not signed a full sentence since 1994, told them her daughter was a certified interpreter. She'd heard it third hand at a funeral years earlier and filed it away, and had never been curious enough to find out what I'd built. She needed a daughter in a dress who could sign, sitting at table 4, being seen. I said yes. The first reaction was hope, which I'm not proud of. The second was rage. The third stuck. I wanted to know whether she'd look at me and feel anything at all. That was the actual plan. I didn't know about the letter yet. Comment table 4 if you'd have gone. I'm genuinely curious whether people think going was the mistake, because I've asked myself that. The gala was October 11th at the Silver Ben Club, in a ballroom called the Harrow Room. 312 people. I saw my mother before she saw me, working the room near the bar. Rehearsed, warm, slightly self-deprecating, and it landed. A villain who's incompetent is one you can dismiss, and my mother has never been dismissible. Blythe found me first. You look great. You look really put together. Like I'd been assembled recently, then. They might introduce the family during the presentation, so just stand up and wave. You don't have to do anything else. Twice now, in writing and out loud. You don't have to do anything. And then, it's just, the association people are here, And they take it seriously, the deaf stuff. So it's good you're here. The deaf stuff. 15 years, and my grandmother's entire life was still a category in that family's private vocabulary. A logistics problem, something you bring a specialist in for. That's when my plan started coming apart, and I hadn't sat down yet. I turned to check the stage because there's something I do automatically in any room with a podium, interpreter position, and sightlines. And the man standing next to it, adjusting his cuffs, was Nate Okonjo. Nate has worked for me for 4 years. He does most of our high-stakes court work, and when he turned and saw his boss standing at table 4 at an event booked by the association, his face did absolutely nothing. That's how good he is. He held my eyes 2 seconds, then glanced down at the badge on his jacket, the one that says Clearhand Language Access in green letters, and back up and raised one eyebrow about a millimeter. Here's the situation as it stood at 7 o'clock. The association had booked an interpreter through the region's contracted agency. That agency is mine. My mother's award ceremony, built entirely on a story about her deaf mother, was being made accessible by the granddaughter she threw out. She had hired me to make her look good. She came to the table at 7:10 and looked at me for 3 full seconds before she spoke. Ivy. Hi, Mom. You came? A beat. You cut your hair. That was the reunion. 15 years. You cut your hair. Then she leaned in and put her hand on the back of my chair, not on me, on the chair, and said, in the voice she uses in rooms, "There are some people from the association here. You'll say hello, won't you? It means a lot to them." Sure. Perfect. And she squeezed the chair and went back to the bar. Deidre Ansel came by at 7:50, 71, president of the association, and she'd known my grandmother since 1984. Blythe waved at her brightly out loud. I stood up and signed back properly, and Deidre stopped and dropped into real speed. I told her who my grandmother was and that I run Clearhand. Corinne told us her daughter was an interpreter. She signed. She did not tell us her daughter was the agency. And when I told her we hadn't spoken in 15 years, her hands went still. At 8:15, I went to get my coat, because I had decided to leave before the presentation. The plan was fully intact at 8:15. The coat room is off the side of the ballroom. There's an antique mirror opposite the door, the kind of thing a club buys in 1974 and never reconsiders. The band was going, brass, at volume, the part of the night where everyone shouts. My mother and my sister were standing in there, 8 feet in front of me, facing away from the door, facing the mirror, and they were signing. People always stop me here and ask why on earth they'd be signing. They were signing because it was a loud room. That's all. Both of them had 20 to 80 signs left from childhood, and what they'd done with the only piece of my grandmother either of them kept was turn it into a private channel, a way to talk across a loud room without anybody hearing, a deaf woman's language, used to keep secrets in front of hearing people. It didn't cross their minds that the one person in that building who could read a badly signed conversation at 40 feet was standing behind them, because I was at table 4, being seen, where I fit. Blythe signed first. Her signing is bad, a child's vocabulary in an adult's body, mouth moving along with it. Is it still in the safe? My mother signed back one sign. Yes. I stopped in the doorway. What happened in my head wasn't feeling, not for 4 seconds. It was work, 16 years of habit locking onto the hands, position, hand shape, band gone. Blythe signed, burn it. My mother made the dismissive face, chin slightly up, and signed. Not while Teo is alive. Teo. That's when I knew. There is one document on earth Teodora Reyes could speak to. She witnessed it at a fitting table on a Wednesday in April when I was 18, and she cried on the phone in November telling me she didn't have a copy. My grandmother's letter was in a fireproof safe in my mother's bedroom closet, 40 minutes from where I was standing. It had been there for 15 years. She hadn't lost it. She hadn't thrown it out in the 2 weeks she cleared out the shop. She had found it, read it, understood exactly what it said, and then looked at her 19-year-old daughter across a kitchen table and said, "There's no letter, Ivy," and kept it, because destroying it would have been an admission. I didn't move. Blythe signed, "Tonight, will she say something?" And my mother laughed. out loud, over the band. Brief and genuinely amused, the laugh of a woman asked whether the weather is going to be a problem. Then she signed the sign they used for me when I was small. A handshape at the cheek, quick, twitchy. Their little joke. Mouse. Then, no. Then, she never asked. 15 years. She never once asked. That's the sentence I'd keep if I could only keep one. She took my inheritance, hid the proof, gave me 4 days to leave, and then spent 15 years reading my silence as evidence that it hadn't mattered. Not as the exact thing she engineered when she told me it would be ugly on me to make it about money. She built a story in which my dignity was proof of her innocence. And she was right about the facts. I hadn't asked, not in 15 years. I stepped back before they turned around, walked down that hallway, put a hand flat on the wall and breathed for 90 seconds. Then I found Nate, reading the run of show, and asked him, looking at the room, not at him, if he'd voice for me if I signed something from the floor after the honoree's remarks. 3 seconds. Is it going to be true? That's the right question, the only question. It's what separates an interpreter from a participant. Every word. Then yes, and I'll voice it flat, no softening. If you sign it, they hear it. Then I asked Deidre one thing. Had Teodora Reyes been invited? Teo, she's at table 19. She's been on our board since 2016. 15 years, and I hadn't known that. My mother built an award submission on a deaf legacy and never checked whether the community she was borrowing had its own memory of that shop, its own board, its own president, and a woman at table 19. Every witness was in the room. She'd invited them herself because they made the story look better. I sat back down at 8:41 and waited. The presentation started at 9, and then they played a slideshow, and I was not prepared for the slideshow. My grandmother blown up on a screen with a piano track under it. No photographs of me, obviously, but in one, taken from behind the counter, there's a stool in the corner. I sat on that stool for 14 years. I watched 300 people applaud a slideshow of my childhood with me cropped out of it, and whatever part of me was still going to leave quietly died right there, to piano music. Then my mother went up. She thanked the chamber and the association for their partnership and their patience. Then she pivoted to my grandmother, and Nate started interpreting, and I watched my mother's words come out of my employees' hands. People ask me why we're called Pharaoh and Daughters. It's because that shop was never one woman. It was a family. 3 generations of us in that building. And then the one that did it. I like to think she'd be proud of what we've carried forward, because everything I do, I still do in her language. I still do in her language. 300 people applauded. Deidre Ansel at the head table did not. Her hands stayed flat on the tablecloth. My mother stepped back with the award in her hand, and the chamber president said, "Corinne, I understand you have family here tonight." And I stood up. Standing up in a ballroom isn't brave. It's mostly loud. The chair, the tablecloth catching. 40 people turned before I'd fully straightened. I did not say anything out loud. I raised my hands and signed, and Nate Okonjo, stage left, in a clear hand badge, paid for by the Deaf Association my mother had used as decoration, voiced every word into a microphone, flat, exactly as he said he would. My name is Ivy Farrow. Rosalind Farrow was my grandmother. My mother's hand tightened on the award. I learned this language from her before I could read. I worked in that shop every Saturday from 5 until 19. I interpreted for her at that counter, because she ran a business as a deaf woman in a county that shouted at her. My mother has not signed a complete sentence to her mother since 1994. She told this room she still works in her language. She knows about 80 signs, and she has spent her life using them to say things in front of hearing people she didn't want overheard. 2 weeks after my grandmother's funeral, she told me at her kitchen table that the shop had been transferred to her and that I had until Sunday to leave. I was 19. I told her about a letter my grandmother wrote that April, witnessed by Teodora Reyes, who worked at 114 Delmar for 22 years and is sitting at table 19 tonight. I did not point. 200 people turned to look at table 19 anyway. Teo put her hand over her mouth. That letter left the building, the business, and $86,000 to me. My mother told me it did not exist. She told me my grandmother was confused. She told me I was her project, not her heir. And she told me not to make it about money. I believed her for 15 years. I stopped believing her tonight, at 8:15, in the coat room down that hallway, where I watched her tell my sister it's still in the safe in her bedroom, and watched my sister tell her to burn it. The sound a room makes at that moment isn't a gasp. It's lower. It's chairs. They said it in sign, because the band was loud. They have used my grandmother's language as a private channel their entire lives. Tonight they used it 8 feet in front of the only person here certified to read it. I turned to my mother. She hadn't moved. She hadn't put the award down. You were right about one thing. I never asked. 15 years, and you decided that meant it didn't matter to me. It mattered every single day. I'm not asking now either. I don't need the money and I don't want the building. What I won't do is sit at table 4 and watch you accept an award for a shop you took. In the language of a woman you put your hand on top of in a diner when I was 8 so she'd stop being loud in public. And then the last part, which I hadn't planned. She used to sign one sentence to me when I got frustrated. She said, "You are not quiet. They are not listening." She was talking about herself. I put my hands down and sat back down. I did not raise my voice, because I don't have a voice in this story. Everything I said in that ballroom was silent, and 300 people heard every word of it, through a man my mother had unknowingly hired. Full accessibility. The chamber president tried to move things along. Well, I think we should. Let's take a short break. And Deidre Ansel stood up at the head table. She didn't use a microphone because she signed, and Nate, who had never sat down, voiced her too. I knew Rosalind Farrow for 26 years. I sat in that shop. In all that time, she never once called it a family business. A pause. She called it her granddaughter's. Then, to the chamber. Our board was told this family included a certified interpreter. Nobody told us she owns the agency staffing this event, or that she hasn't been spoken to in 15 years. We will be reviewing our participation. At table 19, Teodora Reyes stood up. She didn't sign anything and she didn't speak. She just stood, for about 10 seconds, looking at my mother. Judging by my mother's face, that was the one that landed. Blythe caught me in the parking lot crying, which I hadn't expected. Do you have any idea what you just did to her? And I said the only thing I said out loud all night. Blythe, you told her to burn it. And I watched her realize she'd been seen. Not caught. Seen. She'd spent an evening 4 feet from a conversation in a language she'd decided not to learn. I drove home 50 minutes with the radio off, then sat on my kitchen floor in a rented dress and cried for 20 minutes, which is the actual ending of that scene, and the part nobody films. The chamber didn't formally withdraw the award. That's not how chambers work. They announced a review of their verification process, took the write-up off the website, and never issued the certificate. The association ended its partnership with Farrow and Daughters in November, which was the bigger loss. Nobody ran my mother out of town. What ended was more precise. She spent 25 years building a reputation on a story. The story had a hole in it, and the hole got documented in front of the exact 300 people whose good opinion was the entire product. She has never contacted me. 10 months now. Blythe came to my house 9 days later. She got the address from Teo. She stood on the porch holding a shoebox. I took it out of the safe. Inside was a manila envelope, 15 years old, soft at the corners. 2 pages, longhand, in the careful cursive of a woman writing with 40% of her vision left. Teodora Reyes's printed name at the bottom. And underneath, wrapped in shop muslin, the shears. My mother kept those too. For 15 years. In a safe. I read the letter standing on my own porch, got to the last line. Ivy is the only one of them who ever came upstairs, and had to sit down on the step. Blythe stood there the whole time. Then she said the most honest thing anyone in my family has ever said to me. I knew about the letter in 2014. I was 28, and I had a house Mom helped me buy, and I decided it was between you two. I'm not going to ask you to forgive me. I just didn't want to be a person who kept it in a safe. I said, okay. Not thank you. Not I forgive you. Okay. We've spoken twice since, briefly. Some things don't resolve. They just stop being locked. 114. Delmar Street had been a phone repair store, a vape shop, and empty, in that order. I leased it in March. The ground floor is Clearhand's community office now, where we run free walk-in scheduling for people who can't navigate the request systems. I had the gold lettering restored from a photograph. It says, Clearhand, and underneath, in smaller letters, Faro Alterations, EST. 1979. The apartment upstairs is where I keep the stool. On the wall by the front counter, there's a frame with 3 things in it. The letter, the shears, and her thimble. The only thing I owned the day I left with a duffel bag, which sat in 9 apartments over 15 years without ever once feeling like it belonged to me instead of to her. Under the frame, there's a plaque. I wrote it myself and made Nate check my gloss of it because I wanted it right in both languages. It says, Rosalind Farrow said it with her hands. Nobody was listening. Now the whole street is. My grandmother told me, when I was 17 and sloppy, you are not quiet. They are not listening. For 15 years, I thought she was telling me I was strong. She was telling me the truth about the room, which is a better gift. If your family decided you're the quiet one, the small one, the one who fits down there, that isn't an observation about you. It's an assignment. Somebody handed it to you because it made their arithmetic easier, and then read your silence as agreement. You don't have to get loud to cancel it. I never raised my voice once in that ballroom. I never raised my voice once in my entire life in that family. You just have to stop being the only person willing to keep it quiet. If any of this landed, comment hands below and tell me what your family decided you were. I read them. Subscribe if you want more of these, and I'll see you in the next one.